So we've examined the foundations of early Buddhist art with Ashoka as the founding patron and the Great Stupa as the foremost early monument to the Buddha. So these initiate a grand tradition of Buddhist art that continues up to our time. And in South Asia, they show us the beginnings of a sense of stone and sacred space, creating magnificent sacred experiences. So the Great Stupa is a premier example of sacred space. It is not an object. It is a complete spatial environment, one that is experienced as an act of participation through walking meditation. You see here the Buddhist monk walking around the circumference, and then you can walk up to the next level, experiencing it as a cosmic form, the physical experience of ultimate truths. Creating sacred space is one of the enduring purposes of human art making. Again and again across time and space, cultures use stone as a material from which to carve a space that is sacred and enduring. And that goes back to some of the earliest known art, such as the painted caves made in Lascaux, France, more than 20,000 years ago. Those ancient peoples decorated a deep network of limestone caves. This is a cross-section view of these famous caves where they painted astonishingly lifelike depictions of buffalo, horses, oxen, felines, and bears, all to activate their sacred connection to the spiritual forces they understood to be present in animals. Similarly, the Aboriginal peoples of Australia painted powerful serpent imagery in caves to honor the life force in the rock and permeating the world. The sacred architecture of the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition is also frequently built of stone. So we're seeing the Church of Hagia Sophia in Istanbul. We're seeing the Mosque of Sultan Selim in Western Turkey, very closely related buildings. This one influenced this one. Now, these are obviously not natural caves, but the stone in this church and mosque create a kind of built cavern-like space, which dramatizes the sense of sacred light pouring in from the glorious dome floating above. And that is reminiscent of the mandala, which is the diagram of the cosmos that we see in South Asian art. So as we continue to track the growth of South Asian art, we will see it flowering into many more forms, but two things will stay constant: a focus on sacred figures in expressive movement, often in stone, also in bronze, that enliven the sacred experience of the person devoted to the Buddha or to Shiva, and marvelous sacred worlds of stone, which we saw in the Great Stupa, and we will also see going forward in Hindu temples as we explore that branch of South Asian cultural tradition. So it's certainly important in art history to think about the physical facts of the material. They determine many things about the artwork, and they have a quality of sensory experience that adds to the meaning. So you can ask, why stone? Why so many stone sculptures? Why so many stone sacred spaces? And so I'm saying here, what comes to mind when you think of stone as a material? Well, certainly permanence. Even though the Buddha taught that everything is impermanent, a stone structure is more permanent for a longer amount of time than a wooden structure. And the other thing is, of course, that solidity that is part of the permanence also creates a sense of stability, the solid foundation of the truth, whether it's of the Dharma or the Hindu relationship to the deity, the solid basis for sacred experience. The most mind-blowing example of stone sacred space are those structures, those environments that were carved out of the living rock in South Asia. So the Chaitya Hall, located at Karl, is literally hewn from a mountain. So here's the mountain, and here's the carved entranceway, and then you're looking down the interior. It's a longitudinal design, so it's not like the stupa, the Great Stupa, where you go around it. You're moving down in a long axis. And this is, since it's literally hewn from the mountain, like the caves at Lascaux, it takes the spiritual seeker deep into the recesses of the earth, right? But in this case, this has taken tremendous human effort. People have carved away the solid rock rather than finding an existing cave, as the ancient peoples at Lascaux did. So why do this back-breaking feat? We'll see that this is done frequently in this period in South Asia. This is not the only one. In both Buddhism and Hinduism, there are important images of a sacred world mountain and the sacred womb of the earth. And this cave joins those two things. It is, in a sense, physicalizes those symbolic concepts. Practically speaking, as a communal space for meditation, imagine the deep quiet, the dim light, and the coolness of the air, as well as the resonant acoustics, as the focal point, the destination of this long space that you move into as you move into the mountain. There is the form of a stupa. And I wrote on this slide a stupa, but not really. Why? Just to prompt some thinking. And if you think about it, this is carved out of solid mountain rock. It's absolutely solid. There is no space in it, which means there are no ashes. It is not a reliquary. There's no relics of the Buddha in this. So it looks like a stupa, but it doesn't function like a stupa. And here, as a stupa, it's kind of standing in for the Buddha. So we have another way of creating sacred space commemorating the Buddha. We saw the Great Stupa. And here at the Chaitya Hall, we're dealing with massive scale again. Like, look at these people who are here, and look at the scale of the stupa alone, let alone the columns with these carved figures. I'll talk about these embellished sculpted figures, up to the curving ceiling, which is meant to look like wooden architecture, ordinary wooden architecture translated into stone. Another way we can see that it's ordinary, everyday wooden architecture translated into stone. These columns, these stone columns, have these odd little pots on the bottom. There's no reason for that. It's actually taking something that is part of everyday wooden architecture in South Asia at this time, where wooden columns would have a kind of ceramic bowl at the base to stop insects from eating them. It was a protective mechanism. You don't need that if you've carved into living rock, but this is a way in which you're to experience this as the ordinary world of architecture transmuted into the grandiosity and the permanence of stone. So the stone columns are topped with very intricately carved figures, hard to see in this photograph, but they are called Mithuna figures because that's the term for figures that are erotically embracing. They are in positions of lovemaking, which is part of the sacred tradition in South Asia. The idea that the spiritual can be expressed as the very curvaceous, hyper-curvaceous Yakshi, who's expressing so much female erotic power and the power of the generative female body, her fertility, her capacity to give forth life, with the Yaksha, the male nature spirit. And he has this kind of broad shoulder sense of she's got the big boobs and he's got the big shoulders as a kind of prime of life vitality, a sense of the vitality of nature and the union of the female principle and the male principle in a kind of sacred whole.